What's up guys, Charles from TreeTanksDev. In this video, we'll be checking out the Panasonic G9's new firmware update to version 2.0. So there are tons of new features included in this firmware update. I will leave the link in the description for you to check out all the latest updates and new features available on the Panasonic G9. So in this video, I just wanted to see whether or not this Panasonic G9's new firmware update can even come close to the king of autofocus, Sony cameras. So I got my Sony a6500, and definitely among all my cameras, this Sony camera has the fastest and most accurate autofocusing system among any of the cameras that I've ever used. So in this video, I'm not only going to play around with the Panasonic G9 with its new firmware update, I'm going to put it to the test against the Sony a6500 and the other three cameras which I have. First up, the Nikon Z6 with the 35mm f1.8 Nikkor lens. Second would be the Canon EOS RP with the 24 to 105mm f4 lens. And last of all will be my new camera, the Fujifilm X-A7 with the kit lens at 15mm. So what are we waiting for? Let's get straight to the video. Okay, so first up we have the Panasonic G9 with the old firmware version 1.2 against the Sony a6500, and both these cameras are using the same lens, the Sigma 16mm f1.4. So we start off with the Sony a6500 in automatic mode, shooting at 1080p 60 frames per second. The video clip starts off slightly underexposed, but then gradually gets better once it detects my face closer to the camera. But overall, very nice, warm colors and sharp image, and autofocusing is excellent. One thing I didn't really like is the exposure compensation tends to be a little bit wild. Next up we have the Panasonic G9 shooting in automatic mode at 1080p 60 frames per second on the old firmware version 1.2, and being a micro four thirds camera, which effectively means that its sensor is smaller than the rest of the four cameras, it is actually giving off really good brightness and exposure, and the video looks really sharp, and autofocusing overall is pretty good. Not as good as the Sony a6500, but the video is still pretty usable. But it does seem to be affected by a little bit of flickering. So here's a side-by-side comparison between the a6500 and the G9. You can see that the G9 seems to lose focus for about half a second every time I take a step back or forward, while the a6500 keeps my face in focus at all times. So here we are again on the Sony a6500 in automatic mode, but shooting at 4K 30 frames per second. And again, the video starts off pretty underexposed, but gets better once it detects my face closer to the camera. Autofocusing is a little bit worse than compared to 1080p 60 frames per second, but it's still really good. The video is very nice and sharp, and colors are great as well. So coming back to the Panasonic G9 shooting at 4K 30 frames per second, flickering again is pretty apparent. The video is really bright, sometimes a little bit overexposed, but colors look really nice as well. Autofocusing seems to be the same as shooting at 1080p 60 frames per second. Whenever I get closer or further away from the camera, it does seem to lose focus for about half a second. But overall, I do prefer the colors on the Panasonic G9 as compared to the Sony a6500. So overall video quality out of the camera, I would prefer the Panasonic G9 with its bright and teal looking video, but the A6500 definitely has better autofocusing and would be easier to work with if you are doing your own color grading. Right now, let's check out two full-frame cameras that will launch this year, the Canon EOS RP and the camera of the year 2019, the Nikon Z6. This Canon EOS RP is running on its latest firmware with improved face and eye detection. The video starts off pretty dark but then gradually gets brighter. Video quality is really nice in 1080p 60 frames per second, and Canon's dual pixel autofocus system is doing extremely well and has no issues locking onto my face. So now we come to the Nikon Z6 shooting at 1080p 60 frames per second. Straight out of the box, colors look pretty strange and auto exposure is really erratic, going from underexposed to overexposed in a matter of seconds. Autofocusing isn't really that good as well, as it fails to capture my face when I go up close to the camera. So here's the side-by-side comparison between these two full-frame cameras, and it really is worlds apart. The Canon EOS RP has a better overall video quality with really nice color signs, better auto exposure, and better autofocusing as well, while the Nikon Z6 on the other hand seems to struggle in all aspects. So now we come back to the Canon EOS RP shooting at 4K 24 frames per second, and overall video quality looks really sharp and auto exposure is really good as well. Dual pixel autofocus system is performing really well, but I notice when I get up close to the camera there isn't much bokeh effect as compared to the G9 and the A6500. So coming back to the Nikon Z6 shooting at 4K 24 frames per second, colors again look pretty strange and auto exposure is again pretty erratic, but autofocusing does look a little bit better than it was on the 1080p 60 frames per second video. Overall video quality also looks slightly better than shooting in 1080p 60 frames per second, but it does suffer a lot from overexposure issues. So here's the side-by-side comparison between the EOS RP and the Z6, and personally I believe that the EOS RP has a better overall video quality and autofocusing system as well. So right now we come to my last camera, the Fujifilm X-A7. So having used this Fujifilm X-A7 for a while now in automatic mode and 1080p, video quality is really terrible even in broad daylight. You can see in the video it's really underexposed and autofocusing is really terrible. However, it is a lot better in 4K. So now we come to the Fujifilm X-A7 shooting at 4K 30 frames per second, and you can see it is worlds apart from its 1080p video. Overall picture quality is really nice and sharp. Exposure compensation is a little bit pulsing, but the autofocusing system in 4K is so much better than in 1080p. We come to the last challenge, the Panasonic G9 with its new firmware version 2.0 with its improved face and eye detection against the Sony a6500. I am shooting at 4K 60 frames per second and using my own custom color grade. Overall video quality looks really nice and sharp with great exposure compensation, and the autofocusing system, most importantly, does look minimally better than the previous firmware. It does tend to lose focus on my face every once in a while as I'm moving around. So how does it fare up against the Sony a6500? Honestly, I do believe that it doesn't make the cut to beat the Sony a6500, but it does seem a lot better than the rest of the other 4 cameras. So I hope you enjoyed this video on the Panasonic G9 with the autofocusing system against the a6500 and the rest of the cameras. So what do you think? Which of these cameras has the best autofocusing system among all 5 brands? Tell me what you think in the comment section below, whether or not the G9's new autofocusing system even comes close to the a6500 and the rest of the cameras. So hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the notifications button, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.